welcome to the Enterprise Blockchain Review powered by Fifth9. On the podcast today, we have John Lyotier, CEO of blockchain and mesh network startup Rightmesh, and Yakeen Prabdial, CEO of Fifth9 Digital. We will be discussing the future of blockchain in mobile data and the role of mesh networks. Now let us first zoom out and get a bit of an overview of what's been happening most recently in the world of blockchain. First out this month, we had IBM and shipping giant Maersk move their blockchain-based shipping solution from beta to live. The World Bank and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia issued a public bond exclusively through blockchain technology. Their solution, Bondi, has helped to automate bond issuance and sale processes. Bank of America applied for a blockchain patent on the development of a secure crypto storage system. Crowdfunding giant Indiegogo lists the first security token ICO for Aspen Resorts, which will allow investors to purchase Aspen tokens representing tokenized shares in data real estate. China's Baidu joins Alibaba in imposing new anti-crypto measures in line with China's recent initiatives. SEC rejects 9 Bitcoin ETF applications. And last but not least, CCN reports that over the last 3 months, the price of Ethereum has fallen by 60%, which has in turn led to a significant impact on the Ethereum-based token sales. All right, so let us jump straight in. And John, let me ask you, please, could you explain to us what is Rightmesh?
Sure. Rightmesh is a mobile mesh networking platform and protocol that lets people share, connect, and transact without using internet data or infrastructure. So that's a mouthful, and that's a bit of an elevator pitch statement. But really what that means is we allow smartphones to connect to each other in a device-to-device-to-device method rather than going up and through the existing infrastructure of the internet. So if you are in a local environment, be it an office, a university campus, a neighborhood, you can connect from one phone to another phone to another phone without having to pass through a centralized infrastructure. We don't mean that you don't need to find the internet at some point, because often the internet contains amazing, wonderful things, but often the communication and connectivity can occur when people are nearby, such as if you and I are sitting in the same classroom, we can actually send messages back and forth without going up across the system. So if we're using WhatsApp or another type of messaging product, those products do not need to do that, go pass through those centralized servers. They can just go from phone to phone to phone.
So if you were to put that in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, like how would you say that the mobile data, blockchain, and the mesh network are linked together in this solution that you have?
Well, when you throw the blockchain in there, it makes it much more complicated. But from a connectivity standpoint, I believe that when the internet was first designed, it was not designed to be a centralized system. It was designed so that people just could simply connect. And so much of technology and connectivity today does not need to pass through that centralized infrastructure. Even if you look at something like the future of connected cars, it makes 0 sense for it to go car, internet, car, internet, car, internet, car, internet. It should just go car, 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 car. So really what we've been trying to do is build this protocol and software suite that, yes, is powered by some blockchain technologies, but that does allow for that efficiency of communication to occur from device to device to device, or connected car to connected car, if you will, in the future.
Rightmesh recently released your 6 to 8 month technical roadmap. And one of the key takeaways was the need to move into the mainnet deployment faster. What would you say is the key challenge that you're facing as you're moving into mainnet?
Well, I guess from like most organizations, the challenge is always people. It's the technology we're dealing with is really, really hard technology. We can't go out in the world and say, okay, we're looking for somebody who's built one of these things before, and we need to go out and hire 3 or 4 of them because they don't exist yet. So organizationally, one of the biggest challenges that we've faced, well, really always, is making sure you have the right talent at the right time to build the right product. And for us, it's we want to move as fast as possible, but you also have to scale the organization within reason. And if you move too quickly, you end up breaking the existing systems or breaking culture, but you also end up breaking people. At the same time, we have to recognize that the faster we can get to mainnet, the faster we can test some assumptions. And really the core to any product success is testing and validating your assumption with real people and with real data. So we're needing to move as fast as we can, but finding those right people to execute in time is that's basically the problem of any entrepreneur. Is you can never find enough people at the right time. I guess that means when you're doing things right is that you always have that extra work for people to do, but not enough time to do it.
We've heard before that there have been some quite recent fluctuations in the price of Ethereum. Is that something that you've noticed impacting the plans and timelines of Rightmesh?
It doesn't necessarily impact the timelines. It probably may impact some runway elements, because when we initially did our ICO, we were out basically with a $900 to $1,000 ETH price. Obviously, where we are today in the sub $300 ETH price, based on I think where last I looked at it. Although I try not to look at it, it's really if you look at it, it does get distracting. But with where it is today, that does obviously have an impact, because all the funds were raised initially in ETH, and we necessarily couldn't play within those wild fluctuations, or weren't able to convert things right away. But that doesn't necessarily impact the near-term delivery. It does would and could impact some long-term runway. The good thing about us having run a company for the last 8 years is we know how to be frugal. We know how to stretch dollars accordingly. But part of the desire to get up in mainnet as fast as possible is that does allow us to start pushing forward and getting to things that might be revenue producing faster than what we had initially planned. So if we can get to being revenue production, revenue positive, then that is good for everybody, and that really shows the health of the system.
Moving on, Yakeen, from an IoT perspective, there are many developments going on in mobile data network technology, 5G, and like LPWA. So what's happening in this space, and where do you see this technology going?
Yeah, traditional IoT journey has been across your public, rather centralized networks of your second and third generation mobile telephony, which just gave you more and stronger data. With 4G, we just get more of the same, which is the LTE technologies that we've all learned to love, high band rates and bandwidths on our mobile phones. But again, that's all centralized based on going from a mobile device to a central component and then back to another mobile device or a server. In LPWA, there are technologies that are mesh driven, largely in the unregulated license space. So not narrowband IoT or any of those technologies, but rather Sigfox. And they are aimed to hop between the edge technologies and find its path, and hence called self-organizing networks. Further to that, I think in 5G, we're seeing for the first time the standards are embracing mesh and peer-to-peer connections without going back to central. And the first incarnation of that is in vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to thing. So we will start to see a lot of these non-centralized machine-to-machine and IoT communications happening in the future. And this is where I believe technologies such as blockchain and the decentralized abilities for ledgers and storage databases like IPFS play a very strong, meaningful role in the IoT space.
How would you see that blockchain basically is impacting this mobile data space?
We see blockchain as the ability to control a ledger of transactions that makes the flow of that information meaningful, whether it's from a transaction perspective or whether it's the creation of movement of a digital asset. So the ability for a mesh network, especially off-chain, to be able to communicate and have a blockchain behind it that effectively writes to a decentralized ledger is actually quite a powerful combination of technologies. And the important thing is that blockchain gives us the ability to quantify and monetize the very IoT streams that we are trying to create, and the ability for us to then manage that off a centralized solution into a mesh solution is actually going to be the future of getting the proliferation of IoT into mainstream.
If I can jump in there and add to what you said there, Yakeen, I think one of the things that people should know is that the idea of mesh networks and mesh technologies, this is not a new concept. This has been around for a generation. What we are seeing now, however, is that with a proliferation of devices, whether it is a smartphone or sensors or everywhere, that give the density for these networks to establish. When we started to look at the technology and look at what is required, and really why we stumbled into blockchain in the first place, is that one of the big challenges that exist within most traditional networks or most traditional mesh networks is that it's very hard to establish trust. How do you trust a device when it does not have the ability to connect to a centralized trust authority to establish and provide that trust? If I have a smartphone that can't connect to Google, can't connect to an ISP, can't connect to Facebook for my identity layer, how do you trust that I am me and you are you? When we sort of went into blockchain for the very first time, we actually, it was because we had to try to find a solution to that problem. And we stumbled across Ethereum as a solution. We weren't looking to become a blockchain company by any means. We were looking to try to truly solve the problem of how do you establish trust when you can't connect to that centralized authority. We started using Ethereum as an identity layer in our mesh network And from there, it was a natural extension for us to find ways to incentivize that right behavior. But as you get into the IoT space, and as you start getting into the data that the IoT space is able to generate and share, so much of that does not need to go to centralized authority. You can go from an IoT device to a passing smartphone. For us, the ability to connect the smartphone into those existing networks or these new networks that are establishing became key and critical, because those smartphones were the devices that were moving around and connecting these distributed ad hoc networks that were establishing from, I don't know, a farmer's field to a farmer's field, and you basically have the farmer passing between them with the smartphone on their hip. And so for us, what really became the key to establishing a successful mesh at all was really the ability to get it when it is moving, get it when it's when the device themselves becomes part of that network, the smartphone that is from that network.
So we've had HTC. They've recently announced the world's first blockchain phone. And so, John, what are your views on this, and how do you say that helps Rightmesh?
So from our standpoint, it has no impact whatsoever on us today. I do think that the best way to put it, it sounds like a really cool marketing thing, because like everybody is, hey, we're having a blockchain phone, we're having a blockchain this, blockchain that. You don't hear people talk about the database this, database that. I think blockchain, but calling it a blockchain phone is a little bit of a misnomer. I do think that the future of most phones, be it the HTC one or others, will have levels of trust that are intrinsic to the phone. I think that's what they were trying to get at by calling it a blockchain phone, more so than I think honestly, I do think they're trying to take advantage of the marketing hype, but that's just maybe my opinion.
Yeah, John, it's very, very interesting you say that, because I mean, HTC claimed to be the first blockchain phone, but there was one before that, a little known one. And again, they didn't hang upon the marketing hype. They called themselves a digital trust phone. So they were hanging upon some of the features that, as you said, just a distributed database or ledger would give you. And so we're quite interested to see where this blockchain phone and blockchain things would end up being. I mean, for us, one of the things that is quite interesting about Rightmesh is that by having mobile devices, predominantly smartphones today, but they could be edge compute tomorrow, of any nature or form, creating the self-organizing mesh. It implicitly uses your technologies at the edge to create and make any smartphone into a so-called blockchain phone.
Correct. Yeah, one of the things that was really kind of critical to us, and that thing that kind of opened my eyes a little bit, is that when we, because we started using Ethereum identity on the phone itself, every node in the mesh gets an Ethereum ID. We use an Ethereum ID in lieu of an IP address, because you can't always guarantee the internet connectivity, and the internet protocol or your IP address is what sort of identifies you in that medium. But as every node has an Ethereum wallet attached to it, the whole world of tokenization and trust is now open to that device. So one of the things that I sat outside this past winter in Southern California, and I was sitting there in a cold winter's night, and I really, really wanted to have the furnace activated on this patio. And really, from an IoT standpoint, if that furnace itself was connected to my phone through some type of local connection, it would have been great to actually pay for the gas company and pay for the gas for that furnace itself. A connected world where everything has a wallet, everything has identity attached to it that can be trust, and you can trust that I'm going to give you a payment or give you that you can know who I am, really opens up a world of possibilities for payment. But as soon as you have those devices with that identity on it, you start bringing cryptocurrency and tokenization to the masses, and the world and the devices and the computer systems themselves. Most people won't even realize that they've stumbled into this wonderful world of digital currency and digital payments. They'll just be, and just because they'll transact. My car will tell your car to pull over to the side of the road because I want to go faster. I'll give you 25 cents for the privilege. All those things are now possible when you have that distributed trust and payment system built into the system.
Yeah, John, that's very interesting, because one of the pilots we have done with a large mobile operator was to illustrate a capability where an IoT device would be programmed with some logic through a smartphone. So you set up the rules of engagement on how these wallets would transact. And then these things would autonomously talk to each other. And one of the examples that we had, which was quite neat, was an RFID key fob that would go in a car that would effectively decrement its wallet as it passed through tolls. Now, again, we were using 4G networks, but in the capability set that you describe of mesh, there's no reason why those wallet transactions can't happen across a peer-to-peer relationship, which is where it starts to become very interesting.
Correct. And if you think of that, there's also no reason in a way, if every single driver these days has a smartphone, there's no need for that car itself to have a phone as well. And all that connectivity can actually go from just to the person's phone who's sitting there in the driver's seat. Or if there happen to be multiple phones in there, say, hey, well, you have 4 people, therefore it's a lesser rate because you're carpooling. So there's lots of different logic you can start to interpret based off of the proximity of the people and the devices that they have. Driving through Singapore, and that's one of the big things you see is there's tolls going in and out of the city. I guess the same thing with London. You should be able to basically ping from the smartphone passing through a gate in autonomous connectivity and autonomous discovery to actually note that, yes, I'm gone through, and I can actually deduct from my wallet really in that peer-to-peer method.
No, exactly. But then if you extended that use case, and one of the proofs of concept on the pilot that we are now investigating is how to route a vehicle across London into a parking lot, and then the car to make that autonomous decision to buy parking at the nearest spot and negotiate which is the cheapest parking versus the time criticality of needing to get there. All of those decisions are quite interesting. Again, we're using 4G networks, but there's no reason why these can't operate across the mesh that you've described.
Yeah, that's very interesting. An interesting little use case. We have a large team out in Bangladesh. We have a 40-person team here in Vancouver. We have a few people elsewhere in the world, but we also have an 80-person team in Bangladesh. And last fall, I was out there, last December, I was in Bangladesh. We had a hackathon where we basically challenged our developers to go out and solve problems. And one of the problems that the team was working on and managed to do was to basically, could they use a mesh network to determine, is there a traffic jam? And their logic was that there's a whole bunch of sensors on the smartphone. And if you had enough density of users nearby, you can basically do a bit of sensor fusion and determine what actually all those phones are concurrently seeing and hearing and sensing to determine there's a smartphone. Has the traffic volume increased? Has there been a sudden movement of the phones upwards as people look at their phones while they're driving?
Yeah, so there's been quite a lot of activity in the blockchain-based mesh network space. So we've had, for example, Mesh recently launching their project to build the Meshbox hardware and gateway functionality, serving as a kind of a throughput protocol for greater internet performance. So you said that Rightmesh creates the mesh using the smartphone connectivity features like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi Direct. But there have been some questions asked about like the role of super peers and how they essentially seem to take on the role of a central entity. And also some questions about the use of microradent to incentivize packet forwarding. So John, how have the tests been going on this?
It is definitely too early to tell. A big part of our next 4 months is doing a lot of testing. There is so to clarify, we are Android only at this point. We can be extended off into other Java-enabled devices, be it Raspberry Pis, other types of sensors, laptops. We are avoiding iPhones for now. But from a smartphone standpoint, the new smartphones are definitely have more capabilities, but it's probably too early to tell from a battery consumption or from a even sort of reliability, uptime, or those sort of things. That's really what the next number of months are for us to test and start looking at real world deployments. We just moved into a new office and downstairs for a development group, and they've been wiring up these phones. They basically hardwiring in smartphones and trying to figure out a way to put a smartphone on a train track or something like that to rule around their office to simulate somebody walking by. So they're getting a little bit creative in some of the tests, but that really is the next little bit to prove and to find out where those issues rise. But we definitely have an overabundance of smartphones in our office here as we test different flavors.
Oh, that's very good, and that's quite keen to understand that the model of Rightmesh is not just simply the software base, but you're looking at the whole of the ecosystem to make sure that the service is actually usable and scalable.
Yeah, well, I should say yes, we are definitely software based, and that goes back into a foundational principle that our Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Jason Ernst, who is an absolute world leader in mesh technologies. When we first interviewed him many years ago, he says any how do you phrase it? Any suitably qualified PhD can build a mesh network, but it takes a real challenge to build one on a smartphone when you can't root that smartphone. So our challenge from the very start is we need to be able to have it as a software-based system. We believe, as many have said, that software is eating the world. But how do you do so that it becomes frictionless to the consumer, because they don't have to, not the average the average consumer is not going to go out and root their phone and bring it back to a base system. Going out and building hardware ourselves is definitely technically possible, and actually would make mesh networking much easier if you control the hardware. But for us, it's if we can actually build it from a software based, our software can run on any hardware, and that's sort of been the approach we've been taking. So for us, from an Android standpoint, we work on a $30 smartphone that is used in rural Bangladesh or Africa, and that really is the target market that we're going after. Is how can we take our technology and put it onto the lowest common denominator phone, and have those work when others won't.
Yeah, John, I think that's a very interesting point, because going down the hardware route for mesh seems to be a very traditional mesh architecture. And in the general mobile community, specifically in the non-licensed space, we've seen those very same architectural decisions being made to deploy hardware to effectively create a concrete base or foundation of edge points to connect to. So I think I can understand why they've gone down that route. But from your point of view, you've said something very interesting, that the super peers are not centralized. And if you can just demystify that for us, because one of the things that I was reading about was that the super peers effectively created an internal centralized network. But that's not entirely true, is it?
They've been going really well. It goes back into what our technologists have said, is that if you have suitable technologists, those solutions are definitely can be overcome. From our super peer architecture, the super peer itself really is a gateway node. Those are still decentralized in nature. We will be operating super peers ourselves, but so will the rest of the community. And so if you want to run a super peer in a dormitory with a really fast computer, you can. So in that instance, the super peer is not a one centralized system. It's a network of devices that want to act as a gateway to other devices. You alluded to micro radon, and just sort of backtrack a little bit. One of the things that we've had to do and look at is, can you find a way to bring connectivity down into a offline environment? You need to be able to find a way to facilitate sufficient number of transactions through by opening up those payment channels. So from our perspective, we actually have been able to take Raiden and the micro Raiden and port it over to Java to operate into our environments. Those have been effectively able to move transactions back and forth across the network. We do require, at present, one node in the mesh network to have connectivity to log into the channel itself. So if we have 5 devices in a row, those 5 devices would require a single device to have connectivity if you want to log that transaction into one of your channels. So from a Raiden standpoint, where others may be having some challenges, we've been able to overcome those challenges. I should point out from a smart mesh or some of those other groups that are trying to roll out hardware, we truly believe that there is incredible hardware out there. If you look at the routers that are out there, there's incredible hardware companies that really understand the routing technology standpoint. And from that moment on, if they already have the hardware in place, all you need to do is deploy software onto those existing incumbent routers. There's no need at all to go out and build your own routing hardware to do that. You just need to deploy appropriate software on those existing devices.
So pretty much like in the old world of IPs, this is something akin to the realm makers, and it allows me to go from one realm of one IP network to another. But the question is, are these super peers only controlled by Rightmesh, or can they be hosted by third parties?
So one of the things that we've had to do is, how do you connect meshes together, basically make a mesh of meshes when those meshes are on the other side of the world. And really the super peer itself is that device that connects you to that other mesh. So if we have a mesh here in our offices in Vancouver, and we're talking to a mesh in our office in Bangladesh, how do you connect those together? Those require a system, and that could be a box that is sitting as a hardware box in our corner, or it could be a box that's sitting up in a cloud. So while you can still communicate and transact, you can still communicate and share and create a mesh entirely without use of that super peer. That super peer does serve a hole punching mechanism, or it serves as a gateway to those other meshes elsewhere in those worlds.
John, just to play through a thought experiment, unmanaged super peers could be something that could be the future. If I were to describe a smart meter or a gas hub or some IoT device that is buried in a basement box. And there's going to be loads and loads of these wirelessly connected safe harbor environment to be able to host a super peer code. Is it a potential not only for end consumers or prosumers to be able to host them, but for companies and enterprises to be incentivized to insert super peer technology into smart meters?
They definitely can be hosted by third parties, and there's a whole economic incentive for people to do so. We have released all the code already for free up in GitHub. We are encouraging people to go out and build their own super peers. We will be operating some ourselves, but really what we want the community to do is go out and build super peers. There will be a sufficient economic incentive for them to do so. It's too early for me to sort of say some of those numbers right now. We have been working on with token economists to go through some of those things, but it should be a pretty good deal to be a super peer host. And if you have a sufficiently fast connection in market, that's a great opportunity for you to do so. So much like you'd be running a Dash master node or be running a full Ethereum node, those community members who want to definitely host nodes on their own.
So I think that there's going to be a strong denominator of IoT that doesn't really need to go back to the internet. If I were to describe an example of a train or an aeroplane, which doesn't have immediate interconnectivity with the rest of the world, the wireless and wired IoT sensors on the train still provide the full service of what they've been designed to fulfill. If I look at what Rightmesh have been postulating in their vision, extending that service to a direct Wi-Fi or Bluetooth type connection on an island or a pocket of services isn't outside the ordinary. Potentially, if somebody on that train or plane has buffered or cached an episode of the latest Netflix, why couldn't they be incentivized to share that across that service?
Absolutely, it's a very good use case. So we were having a conversation yesterday because we have half the company that has existed for many years that's been paying bills up until this point that is heavily invested in the vacation rental and travel space, and we were talking about a future in which what does a future look like where every vacation rental on the planet is also operating as super peer? Or what happens when every Starbucks is also a super peer? And so in that instance, you could have a smart meter that technically could run super peer code and be earning revenue as people pass by that smart meter. So that's definitely a possibility in the future where each of those devices serves as a gateway to the community nearby. That's definitely a possibility.
So Rightmesh is using the smartphone connectivity feature to generate the mesh network.
I think the one thing that we got to be sensitive on is that predominantly today's IoT in the public space is a centralized solution, whilst in the private space tends to be decentralized. And by that, I mean that it might be local. As a good example, you may not need in order to turn the lights on from your mobile phone. So those sorts of technologies exist today. How we then see mesh technologies becoming more intrinsically part of IoT is dependent on the success of price and price erosion with low power wide area. I think it's very important to note that unless we can get to a single dollar point on IoT that is wirelessly connected, it is very difficult for us to see hundreds of edge points per individual on the planet. And today, the soothsayers call it 7 devices per person. But those are very expensive devices in the greater scheme of things. It may not be smart compute, but they're definitely going to be IoT sensors. And the question is whether mesh will play a significant role in not only giving them the ability to connect most efficiently, but also monetizing their true worth.
With autonomous cars, that's this whole concept of cars being able to work themselves, so that a car will be able to take out a loan, like carry out journeys, pay off its own loan, and essentially make decisions about what to do with their income themselves. So there is this whole idea of things having autonomy, and as a consequence, they'll create a completely new place in the economy for themselves. But say we play with the idea that intelligent devices have the power through the mesh to create their own networks, and then to scale those networks to where the transactions are happening right now. This idea of self-generating autonomous mesh networks that spring up at any one time is something that's actually possible.
Absolutely. And I'm going to sort of unpack it one level further with a sort of a core philosophy that I have. One of the things that really excites me about this whole blockchain revolution we're living in is that really it's ushering in this new age of the robot, this new age of these autonomous units that you'd alluded to. So if you think about what is a robot, it really is a machine that's doing work on my behalf. I am the owner, and the machine does work for me or for my company, and in that essence, it produces value on my behalf. Really, what we have seen as a society as a mining rig for Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency is the very first machine that is producing value, work, on behalf of its owner, and therefore producing wealth on behalf of its owner. What we're about to see, we believe, is that there is a entire next generation of robots that's coming in the shape of a small rectangle that you walk around with in the palm of your hand. We do believe that a robot, a smartphone, can sit and produce value on behalf of its owner, very much like the mining rig does today. That autonomous nature of going out and generating value can definitely be extended to a smartphone. So if I'm walking around, I'm earning value for providing connectivity to my peers. I'm earning value for providing storage capacity. I'm earning value for my sensor information. I'm earning value for being a bit of a data mule, carrying data from one pocket of connectivity to another. I also can be incentivized through my actions to even being able to go physically to certain locations because there's more value there for me to do so. Maybe I become a critical bridge in a network, or maybe I can go up and pick up a packet of data that has extreme value to somebody else, and be able to carry it over to the other side. You take it to next extreme, it is definitely possible and probably more likely probable that individuals will have fleets of autonomous drones that will be circling around the skies with rules to go out and make money. That rule to go out and make money will be really governed by almost really no more complicated algorithms than what drives Uber today, and that if you go here, you will earn more revenue. So if my drone is going to go out and be hovering above a festival to deliver connectivity to that festival, it can go out and provide a whole level of connectivity and services or content, or whatever it happens to be, and then return back to base as necessary. I answered a questionnaire just the other day for the Canadian government, looking at what is the role of virtual currency, what's the role of cryptocurrencies. And I said, whatever rules and legislation we come up with, we must make sure that it can address the following use case. And that use case was, I, as a participant in an investment club, will say to my investment club, go out and earn value. That value decides to go out and buy a fleet of autonomous vehicles. Those autonomous vehicles now goes out, are fully self-driving vehicles, and they actually will do long haul services from one side of the country to the other side of the country. When it arrives at the other side of the country, it should get paid for the delivery of the goods, but also we should make sure that we can pay for the fuel all the way along. Those rules are just that. They're rules that can be programmed. When you start to bring in connectivity with trust, which is what the cryptocurrency and blockchain stuff provides, with these new smart robots, that future is really, really cool.
Thank you very much for your time. This was the future of blockchain in mobile data and the role of mesh networks, in a discussion between Yakeen Prabdial and John Lyotier. This podcast has been brought to you by Fifth Nine Digital. You can find us online at www.fifth-9.com.